All right, so get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into the intricate world of the Somali language.
Ooh, I love this one.
I know, right? Okay. Prepping for this deep dive has been really eye-opening. I always thought Somali was fascinating, but
Oh, yeah.
it's even more intricate and layered than I ever imagined.
Right.
Like, for instance, did you know that there's actually evidence of writing systems in the region that predate its use for Somali?
I mean, it makes sense, right? But,
Yeah.
it's not something that you really think about every day.
No, exactly. It's like stumbling upon like a hidden chapter in a history book.
Yeah.
You assume you know the story, but then boom, there's this whole other side you never knew about.
It's kind of like uncovering those ancient cities,
Yes.
It's like, we always thought this is how it was, but then you dig a little deeper and it's like, oh, there's a whole other civilization under here.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what we're doing today, but with a language.
Yeah.
So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's lay some groundwork. I always find it helpful to understand where things fit in a broader context.
Yeah, totally.
So when we talk about Somali, what language family are we even dealing with here?
Well, Somali belongs to this really fascinating branch of languages called the Cushitic branch, which is a part of the even bigger Afroasiatic language family.
Okay, so it has like linguistic cousins. Who else is hanging out at this family reunion?
Picture this. Somali is like sharing a family photo with languages like Afar and Saho. Ever heard of those?
I'll admit, those are new to me.
Yeah. Well, they're mainly spoken in parts of Eritrea, Djibouti, and Ethiopia.
Got it, that whole region. So are there a lot of similarities between these languages?
That's what's really interesting about Somali, especially from a linguistic standpoint. It's incredibly well documented compared to some of its relatives. We're talking serious academic studies going all the way back to the late 19th century.
Wow, it's like the overachiever of the family. They've got the whole photo album going back generations.
Exactly. And that makes it a bit of a star, academically speaking.
I love that. Okay, so we've got its family tree figured out. But let's zoom out a bit. Where in the world would I actually hear Somali being spoken? Is it just Somalia, or is it more widespread?
This is where it gets really interesting because while, yeah, it's primarily linked to Somalia, its reach extends way beyond its borders.
Like where?
Think Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, even parts of Yemen.
Wow, I had no idea it was that widespread.
It's true. And with the Somali diaspora growing all over the world, honestly, there's a good chance you've crossed paths with a Somali speaker without realizing it.
That's amazing. It really goes to show you how interconnected we all are. And within
Yeah.
these regions, it's not just a language spoken at home, right?
Here.
It's got some official status, too, from what I understand.
Oh, absolutely. Somali holds the esteemed title of official language in both Somalia and Ethiopia, which is huge. And then in Djibouti, it's recognized as a national language.
So it's used in government, education, all the important stuff.
Exactly. It's really woven into the fabric of these nations. And it's not just on paper either. You can even tune into broadcasts like Radio Mogadishu. They've been using Somali since the early 1950s.
Wow, that's impressive. It speaks to the language's vibrancy, that it's not just surviving, but thriving.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered where Somali fits in the grand scheme of things, its geographical reach, its official status. Now, I want to get into the nitty-gritty, the sounds of Somali itself.
Yes.
It's one thing to see a language written down, but I'm super curious about how it actually sounds, how it flows.
Absolutely. Well, in preparing for our deep dive today, I stumbled across something really interesting about Somali vowels.
Ooh, do tell. I'm all ears.
So do you know how English has a bunch of vowel sounds?
Yeah, more than we can count on one hand, that's for sure.
Right. Well, Somali on the surface seems to have something in common with us and a lot of European languages. It uses 5 basic vowel sounds.
Okay, so far so familiar, but I have a feeling there's a but coming.
Yeah, there is. Because even though it has this 5 vowel system, the way those vowels are pronounced, it's not quite the same as what we're used to hearing.
So it's like they borrowed the vowels but gave them their own twist.
Precisely. For example, they have this one vowel sound that's kind of like a cross between the A in father and the E in bed. It's subtle, but it creates this whole other auditory texture.
That's wild. I never would have thought about it like that. Okay, so we've got vowels somewhat covered. What about consonants? Anything that would surprise English speakers?
Oh, tons. For
Nice.
example, Somali has these things called the retroflex consonants. Have you ever heard of those?
Can't say that I have.
So it involves curling your tongue back, almost like you're about to make an R sound in some languages. It's really cool.
Wait, so there's like specific tongue gymnastics involved.
Exactly. It's like each language has its own set of rules for how to move your mouth. And these sounds, they're super common in Somali, but they might sound a bit strange to like an English speaker hearing them for the first time.
I bet. It reminds me of how some languages have clicking sounds. Like it just seems impossible until you hear someone do it naturally.
Right. And it's all part of what gives Somali its unique flavor. And speaking of unique features, let's talk about tonality.
Ooh, yes. Tonal languages have always fascinated me. It's like there's this whole other layer of meaning encoded in the way you say something.
It's true. And with Somali, there's actually a bit of debate among linguists about whether it's a true tonal language like Mandarin Chinese, where the tone can completely change the meaning of a word.
Oh, I see.
But regardless of where you fall in that debate, one thing's for sure. The way your voice rises and falls plays a big part in conveying meaning in Somali.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it. Got it. I'm hooked.
Uh,
Okay, now I need to know about grammar. What's the deal with Somali grammar?
Get ready for another cool quirk. Somali is what we call an agglutinative language.
Agglutinative. Okay, now you're just using big words to make me feel like I'm back in school.
No, it's not as scary as it sounds. Think of it like this. Instead of having separate words for things like verb tenses or plural nouns, Somali uses prefixes and suffixes.
Okay, so it's like building a word out of smaller pieces.
Exactly. Like those magnetic construction toys where you snap different parts together to make all sorts of different structures.
Oh, I love those. So you're saying instead of having a whole new word, you just tack on a little something to the beginning or end.
Yeah, you got it. It's all about building meaning by putting together these smaller units.
That's really cool. And speaking of building, let's talk about word origins. We touched on it a little with the Arabic influence, but I'm curious to dive a bit deeper.
Word origins are like these little windows into history and cultural exchange. And Somali, given its location and all the different groups it's interacted with over the centuries, it's borrowed words from a whole bunch of languages. Like, did you know that about 20% of Somali vocabulary comes from Arabic?
20%. Wow, that's a lot. What are some examples?
So many. Like the word amin, which means faith in God. It's used in religious contexts, but also in everyday conversation.
So it's like how some English words have roots in Latin or Greek. Fascinating.
Absolutely. And the borrowing doesn't stop there. Remember how we talked about Somali's colonial past with Italy?
Yeah.
Well, there are tons of Italian loanwords in Somali, too. Like the word for tie is garwati, which comes directly from the Italian cravatta.
That's amazing. It's like each borrowed word tells a story about the language's journey.
Exactly. It's a reminder that languages aren't static. They're shaped by the people and cultures they come into contact with.
For sure. It makes you realize that even something as basic as the words we use every day have these long, complex histories.
Right. And speaking of history, we've talked a lot about spoken Somali, but we haven't even touched on the written word yet.
Oh, that's right. And I'm guessing that's a whole other story in and of itself, isn't it?
You could say that again.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from vowel sounds to borrowed words. But one thing we haven't talked about yet is how Somali went from the spoken word to the written word.
Right.
Like, how did people start writing it down?
Well, the journey to written Somali is, it's even more interesting than you might think, because before we even get to the writing systems that we know today, there's evidence of even earlier scripts being used in that region.
Hold on, are we talking like ancient hieroglyphics level old?
Pretty much. Archaeologists have found these inscriptions that actually predate the use of the Arabic script for Somali.
Get out of here. That's incredible. Okay, I need details. What were these ancient scripts and what were they used for? And how did Somali finally get its own writing system? So many questions.
Well, slow down. We've got time.
Sorry, just get excited.
No worries. I do too. It's amazing stuff. So to answer your questions, first of all, these ancient scripts were not entirely sure what they were used for. Yeah, it's still a bit of a mystery. But a researcher named Sada Mir, she's been doing some amazing work trying to decipher them and understand their significance.
So it's like a real-life code-breaking mission. That's so cool.
Totally. And her research is really challenging some old assumptions about the history of writing in that part of the world.
Wow. Okay, so we've got ancient mystery scripts. What about Somali itself? When did it get its own writing system?
Well, for a pretty long time, Somali actually relied on the Arabic script.
That makes sense, given the whole Arabic influence we talked about.
Exactly. It was the go-to for religious texts, poetry, that kind of thing. But then in the 20th century, there was this push to create a writing system specifically for Somali.
Oh, I see. Like they wanted their own thing.
Yeah, it was about cultural identity, representation, all of that. And that's where the Somali Latin alphabet comes in.
Ah, the one that's used today.
That's the one. They officially adopted it in 1972, and it's been the standard ever since.
Interesting. So they basically took our alphabet and made it work for their language.
Pretty much. They kept most of the letters we know, but dropped a few that weren't needed, like P, V, and Z. It's really elegant, actually.
Huh. I never thought about it like that. But it makes sense. Why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to?
Exactly. And, the Somali Latin alphabet, it wasn't the only game in town. There were actually a few other writing systems that were developed for Somali around the same time.
Really? Like what?
So there was Osmania, Borama, and Kader.
Wow. They all sound so, I don't know, exotic.
Right. Each one had its own unique features and its own group of supporters, but in the end, the Somali Latin alphabet, it just kind of won out.
Why do you think that was?
Well, I think practicality played a big part. It's
Yeah.
relatively easy to learn, especially if you're already familiar with the Latin alphabet.
It's true, true. Makes you wonder what would have happened if one of the other scripts had become the standard, though.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a sliding doors moment for languages. It just goes to show you that even something as seemingly fundamental as a writing system, it's still influenced by all sorts of historical factors.
It really makes you appreciate how much goes into shaping a language. I mean, we've barely scratched the surface today, and I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. And you know what? That's the beauty of languages.
What's that?
There's always more to discover, always another layer to peel back.
I love that. Well said. So, to wrap things up for today, I think the big takeaway here is that Somali is way more than just a collection of words and grammar rules.
100%.
It's a living, breathing reflection of history, culture, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. From its ancient roots to its modern-day evolution, Somali has this incredible story to tell. And honestly, this deep dive has just made me want to learn even more.
Me too. It's such a rich and vibrant language, and it's been an honor to explore it with you today.
A feeling is mutual. So, to our listeners, if you're as intrigued by the Somali language as we are, we encourage you to keep exploring. There's a whole world out there just waiting to be discovered. And who knows, maybe one day you'll even be able to have a conversation in Somali yourself. Until next time.